Welcome to First Class Fantasy. I'm Theo Gremminger. Billy Muzio is not with us this week, but I'm joined by my friend John Daigle of 4 for 4, who's actually a repeat First Class Fantasy guest. So John has podcasted with me a bunch of times in the past now. You've been extremely generous with your time and coming on all these shows. I've never had you on a press coverage though, which I just realized when I was showing you my dope new intro screen for it, John. So I got to get you there in the second half of the year, but you're absolutely crushing it on the content side. Love what you do at 4 for 4. You're like a machine. You're pumping out articles, you're pumping out podcasts. Why don't you let everybody know kind of what your schedule looks like this time of year, the shows you're putting out, the articles you're putting out, and welcome to the show, man.
Thank you for the kind words. You and I obviously go back a little bit since we are true friends. And this time of year, as everyone knows, there's just a lot going on. What catches up to you, like what really you try to avoid, and you get better at it, like in this industry, the longer you hang around. I've been doing it for 10 plus years, so it gets easier, but you really just try to avoid burnout. And what that comes down to is creating more personal time around the homework, because like these shows, these don't happen without homework. I think that's what a lot of people forget, that we just don't show up. Like I have to be up, all of us have to be up so late into the night, so early in the morning, and just cranking away at the spreadsheets, at different target shares, at touch shares, at every stat that we have learned to either put into our process or leave out because we don't think it's pertinent for fantasy success over the years. And that's a first world complaint because I'm working my dream job. Don't worry, I'm doing just fine. But at this time of the year, yeah, there are a lot of things going on around the clock. My schedule for 4 for 4, it's pretty simple. It is the Sunday recap show I do at The Most Accurate Podcast, where usually all of it happens with Josh Norris and Hayden Winks of the Underdog crew. We all work together at Roto World. So it's always fun to do that show together on Sunday, to be ready in your feeds by Monday morning, just in case you did not watch all the games. We're there with fantasy stats and just recapping, since we actually assign one another games and we were all in charge of watching those games just to make sure we don't miss anything. Followed by the waiver wire column and show, 4for4.com and These Are the Most Accurate Podcast on Mondays. Not to mention the preview show on Thursday, and then DFS show on Friday, all on the 4 for 4 YouTube page as well.
Let everybody know you've got to have a little bit of a discount this time of year. Can you break off a John Daigle discount code for 4 for 4?
It's pretty simple. It's actually Daigle, and that now gets you up to 33% off the rest of the season, since we are 33% of the way through. And you would think that it slows down 33% of the way through, but I dare anyone to just go into their apps right now, scroll up to the first place team in your league, and you'll even see that their team doesn't look that great unless they stack the Dolphins, because that's the way fantasy football is working out this year, that unless you have Puka or the Dolphins, you're catchable, you're beatable, your record can definitely slide back. So we're all still competing. So the waiver wire is more pertinent than ever. Actually, I think this week my column, and I know you do the waiver wire column too for Player Profiler, I think my column was the longest it's been all year this week because of all the injury chaos and bye weeks happening.
It broke me this week to write it.
Yeah.
It was like it was more like writing a week 1 waiver wire column, because there were so many names out there that you had to cover and so many situations. And John, I'll give you a big shout out, because you're a waiver wire column guy. It's a labor of love. I know you've been doing this a lot longer than I have with the fantasy football content creation. So you obviously must enjoy the torture of the quick turnaround, having to write on a schedule. I mean, it's like you don't want to give it up, even though you kind of do want to give it up. Is that kind of how I'm reading it?
I always think I want less, but maybe I am a glutton for punishment, because like I'm always going to be a grinder. I've tried to separate from the grinding mentality. I just do it in much healthier ways now, like set an allotment of hours to grind and then to step away and like walk out for coffee or walk to the neighborhood or maybe even take my laptop to a brewery and like edit the waiver column over a couple IPAs. That's the way I grind now. I do it in a much more healthy manner. And as you can see, I still have energy. I still have a smile on my face. So through week 6, at least, we're still kicking it.
Yeah, no, I'm like that. Like I started doing it years ago and I'm like, this is a lot of work. But I think it makes you a much faster writer and it makes you pay attention to every single game. So I think it makes me a better player as well. But I talked to Ryan Reynolds of the 33rd team the other day, and he used to do it for Establish the Run, and now he's gotten away from it. And I'm like, man, you used to write some good stuff, but I don't think he misses it too much. So shout out to all the people putting out. I think it's Sam Sherman doing it over there now at ETR, but all the people writing waiver wire articles, a big hat tip. It's definitely tough.
I also think it helps. Like you and I play in every kind of league. Like the fact we play in 10K leagues all the way down to like $10 home leagues, I think certainly helps. It keeps it interesting. It gives me more problems to solve and more questions to answer, both for myself and for everyone, so I can help out everyone, no matter what status of league you play in. Also, wearing many hats. Like, my week consists of DFS, player props, bets, and obviously start sits and fantasy football. And all of that information is the same. You just have to parse it differently, which is what I love. Like I then have to be in touch with all the information because it all fits in some way. I just didn't have to decide how it fits. And we'll talk about some of those like game situations for this week that trickle down into DFS and football fantasy as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. And who did you end up with in your waiver wires? Because for me, like we're all bidding on a lot of the same guys. I had some Demarcado. I've had a couple of these guys stashed. I ended up with actually a good amount of Deonta Foreman. You have boots in the ground of Chicago. What are we hearing with Roschon Johnson? And is he going to play this week?
Truly up in the air. A lot closer than I thought, given the 10 days in between kickoffs. And that one's a finicky situation because I just assumed Roschon Johnson. I also do a show with our friend, one of my best friends in life, Rich Rebar of Sharp Football. And on Wednesday, his perspective that I didn't even think about made me realize that there are two sides of the fence for Roschon Johnson. And so I fall on the side that, yes, Roschon leads the team in targets and carries when they're trailing by 8+ points. He's been their negative game script back, which is why some people played Herbert in DFS against the Broncos a couple weeks ago, because they thought they were going to compete or lead against the Broncos, which was true. Herbert exploded. And I just assumed as the negative game script back, Roschon, with Herbert out of the way, since Roschon forced Deontay Foreman to be a healthy scratch in every game since week 2, he would be the fallback. He would get every single touch, or at least 70-30 timeshare. But the way Rich was talking about it, and like we started passing it back and forth, is that maybe Foreman is just active for Herbert's role. And so if that's the case, that is still very much a detriment to Roschon Johnson's outlook. So I'm curious how you view it. I'm instead leaning, I still believe in Roschon Johnson fully if Herbert is out, if Roschon plays. Otherwise, yes, then. If both are out, Deontay Foreman clearly a fringe RB1 based solely on touches, and that game environment, given even the total, has dropped 6 points because, as you mentioned, boots on the ground, it's supposed to rain every night through the evening till Monday. And as we know, Commanders and Soldier Field, they are going to be the worst fields when it comes to weather.
Yeah, it's for me, Roschon's the guy that we've really been kind of, I think, ahead of a lot of sites on at Player Profiler. We love Roschon Johnson. This is like the opportunity for him on paper, but I think funny things happen with rookies. A lot of times we look at them and we think that they're going to get this larger opportunity where some coaching staffs might look at them and they'll be like, we're okay with Roschon not giving him too much. We don't want to set him up to fail. We've got this guy, Deonta Foreman, who, we can say a lot of things about Deonta Foreman, but one thing he's able to do is he's able to handle a high number of carries in a game. Went over 900 yards rushing last year. The year before went over 650 rushing yards. So I'm kind of in I'm kind of being a little bit neutral here. Roschon, if he was available in my leagues, would have been easily my number one waiver wire ad because I think he's a big back who can catch the ball. But Deonta Foreman, I did end up with a lot of in waivers. I think there's something to be said with having a 1 week smash game like this time of year. A lot of times when we're playing in leagues like NFFC and FFPC, like those points and that one win does matter to me.
Oh, yeah.
And then if he just inherits a weekly touches of like 10 touches a week and Roschon handles, let's say 65% of the work, you still have a little something to get you through like bye week hell. John, we got Buymageddon part 2 coming up next week. So we got to start preparing for all of that good stuff. But did you end up with anybody else interesting, like generally on your teams? Was there a guy that you ended up with a few shares of?
Emari Demarcado. I don't know if you want to talk about that now. That was the
No,
big
we can
name.
We can go for it. Let's go for it.
And we can go into some deeper guys after that. But I do think I have a lot more confidence in Demarcado than a lot of people because everyone overreacted to Keontay Ingram now presumably playing this game, but that was baked into the process the entire time. In the 3 games Ingram and Demarcado played together to start the year, not only did Demarcado run 14 routes to Ingram's 7, but also he outsnapped Ingram 17-0 on 3rd down. Like, Ingram is not a part of the passing game whatsoever. And the Cardinals are not only 7-point road dogs this week against the Rams with a miserable defense that's creating the league's lowest pressure rate. So we think Stafford is about to just throw all over them with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua at full speed, thus putting Demarcado in the game, especially in PPR leagues like FFPC, but also over their next 3 games for the next month of the season with James Conner on IR this entire time. The Cardinals are at the lowest point 6.5-point dogs. And those are look-ahead lines that move to even further like negative game scripts projected if they just get steamrolled this week. So we want the pass catching back for the Cardinals, and that is clearly Demarcado. And that doesn't even bake in the fact that Ingram has been terrible. He has 15 rushing yards on 12 carries this year. So like now imagine if they just saw what Demarcado did off the bench in the second half last week and say, like, he's the better runner too. Why would we actually give the ball back to Ingram on early downs? I'm not even counting that part.
Yeah, it felt like a weird, like, summertime tweet bomb by Schefter where it's like the depth chart people getting after it. But I think you hit the nail on the head. And I had Adam Levitan on press coverage yesterday. Highly recommend it if you guys didn't see it. It was a good show, dropping as a pod today. But Adam had the same take you did, that Demarcado is the guy. Billy Muzio is also on Demarcado. I think at the end of the day, we've just seen enough of Keontay Ingram. Demarcado, undrafted free agent, gets himself a role, starts producing. I don't see why you go back to Ingram, but we'll find out. For Ingram, I did add some Ingram because I had a decent amount of Demarcado. We cleaned them up. Like last week, I added a couple cheap ones. But I'll say, John, like people were going ham on Demarcado in some of the fab bids. I saw a 60% plus in an NFFC league. So I don't know. It was tough to gauge, but we have the chat is lit right now. We're going to get to some of these start sit questions that I see in the chat. We're also going to talk about a couple of other players who have new increased roles, such as KJ Osborn, after we hear a word from our sponsors.
Hey, we're all starting new fantasy leagues all the time. And more often than not, where do we start our fantasy leagues at Player Profiler? On Sleeper. Because it's the best. You can imagine my excitement when I saw Sleeper rolled out Sleeper Picks, baby. And game stacking is the path to positive returns with these pick'em games. Find that sneaky shootout and set most of the players to go over their projection for that week. Or you find a game going to get dragged into the mud and take every member of the passing game for less than their projections that week. And if you pick up to 8, that's how you 100x your payout on Sleeper. It's called the Hail Mary. So if you use promo code Underworld, you get a $100 instant deposit match. Check out Sleeper's terms and conditions for details. These Sleeper picks are live in over 25 states. Yeah, buddy.
Welcome back to First Class Fantasy. I'm Theo Gremminger, joined by John Daigle. Our ad was just sleeper. And John, like the sleeper notifications this time of year can sometimes give you like an anxiety attack. And this week has been, definitely that case with all these injuries. We just talked about Arizona, and James Conner doesn't even like register because we have the losses of Justin Jefferson and Devon Achane. Another guy who was available in a lot of these waiver wires was KJ Osborn. Not as readily available in some of these deeper leagues, but certainly in a lot of home leagues, he was definitely a big ad. And I did see him go for a ton in some FFPC leagues last night. What are your thoughts on Osborn, and sort of does he see a bump up, or is he to you like a wide receiver 3? Like, how are you viewing Osborn with his opportunity to fill in for Justin Jefferson?
I would imagine Osborn sees a few more targets just by default, given that Jefferson's leaving behind double-digit targets per game. But he's also not the kind of player I want to buy into if I didn't need to. Again, we're all in different situations, which is why the waiver call is always interesting to write, because some people can't afford to hold on to Marvin Mims. They may need KJ Osborn because he has a higher weekly floor, but Osborn hasn't been earning targets even as the team's starting second wide receiver. He's ran more routes in every single game over Jordan Addison until last week when Jefferson was injured. And even then, Osborn is 95th out of 107 wide receivers to see 10 plus targets this year and targets per route run. He just can't earn anything. Whereas here's Addison, who's earned 2 more targets on 36 fewer routes run. Addison's the one I don't lose any amount of confidence in, if not having even more confidence in now that he is going to be on the field full time, a la Jefferson's role. So Osborn, you can definitely plug in, but still to me, it's closer to a wide receiver 3 or 4 with no bye weeks, probably a wide receiver 4 that you're just crossing your fingers for. And it's a small sample, but I do just wonder if the bottom falls out entirely for Kirk Cousins, given that, only 12 pass attempts with Jefferson off the field last year, but still 5.8 yards per attempt, 58% completion rate. Maybe without the best wide receiver in the league, everything is just terrible. That also is the way this can play out.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's definitely like once we kind of know what a guy is, it's hard to think that he's going to take on some like massive role. And I think that KJ Osborn is a guy that will have some boom weeks. He's probably a better in best ball type.
Yeah.
But last year he did have a couple of really, really strong weeks filling in for Adam Thielen. I just worry about the quality of the offense. Like last year, he had those big weeks when Justin Jefferson was on the field. Now you have Jordan Addison, who doesn't command nearly as much attention, to say the least. So I think they have to take this offense back a notch. And Kirk Cousins, like, are you benching him straight up, or is he a guy that you're still going to consider putting in lineups? Like, how concerned are you about this offense taking a big step back?
It genuinely just depends on your league. Whereas like maybe he and Brock Purdy were eye to eye, or a Sam Howell. Those are players I'm now probably starting over him, especially this week. I have no interest in Kirk Cousins, given the offensive environment, given the weather we've talked about, how bad it's going to be at Soldier Field, the dipping total. No interest in playing him this week in what should have otherwise been a good matchup against the Bears. But now I very much worry about everyone.
Yeah, no, that's kind of where I'm at. Certainly I have him on some super flex rosters, whatever, but in single quarterback, if you have guys that are close, you're absolutely going with them over Kirk Cousins. Very, very nervous about this. I don't necessarily think we're going to see a trade for Kirk Cousins. I know there's teams kind of creeping around there, but I don't know. He's got a no trade clause. It seems like, does he want to switch teams? We'll see. I know that there's been some rumblings, but I don't really see that. What about you? Do you think that we're going to see Kirk Cousins potentially moved, or is that just kind of wishful thinking?
I never say never, since Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan, Jared Goff, Todd Gurley, like all these, AJ Brown, all these guys with huge cap hits that everyone said they just can't be traded. Obviously not true. There's a way anyone can be traded now. But at this time of the year, I genuinely don't think so. I think we're closer to him getting benched than anything. If they continue don't having wins, like they at least have Day 3 rookie Jaron Hall as like their only backup quarterback. Maybe they want to see a few reps there because they have to decide like which direction to go in the offseason. Or more importantly, maybe they just start playing to Caleb Williams or Drake May like quietly.
Gosh, that would be going to Jaron Hall would be an absolute like a double kick to the balls for Justin Jefferson managers, which now have to endure the IR and then potentially don't even put that out there in the universe, John.
It sucks if you don't have an IR slot because
so bad.
Like with Justin Jefferson and Anthony Richardson, both who I genuinely doubt come back, especially given like how the Vikings are built. They're not built to win games and sustain in this kind of environment without him. They weren't doing it with him. And so now that the team didn't agree to a long-term extension in the offseason, he has no reason to hurry back. It's very skeptical whenever Schefter like sends out Justin Jefferson to IR, and then his very next tweet is, with Jefferson not having a long-term deal, like maybe he holds out longer than expected. It's like, oh, so someone told you something. That's my initial perception. So I doubt we see him and Richardson again. Richardson more for the injury than anything. But it being only week 6, if you don't have an IR slot, you also can't drop them. Like maybe you drop Richardson, maybe in like single quarterback leagues. But I'm in a couple super flex, and there's not a chance in hell. I'm dropping Deshaun Watson before I drop Richardson.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's just tilting. We haven't even talked about the Richardson injury. That one we'll definitely get to. But I have 2 questions. One in the chat that's interesting. My love for this channel runs 18 months deep. Appreciate that, Go Jin. I'm here to stay, but can the same be said for Jahan Dotson? Do you want to drop Dotson for Chuba Hubbard? I think I'm making that move. John, where are you at?
Yeah, for these types of questions, I usually just ask myself, would I start this guy or this guy? And right now, Jahan Dotson's unstartable, even in bye weeks. Washington's target tree has just flattened out so much under Eric Bieniemy. Terry McLaurin leading their wide receivers with a 16% target share. At times in that game on Thursday night, they had both McLaurin and Dotson off the field in favor of Diami Brown and Jamison Crowder. That's where the Commanders are at right now. And so with Logan Thomas being the only one who can earn targets in that offense, Logan Thomas, who's not here for a long time, but he's always here for a good time, then I would easily drop Dotson for Chuba. That one's fun because Chuba's like one of those RB2s or contingency players that you never drop, right? Like you have to keep him on your roster, but you can also never play him. What it was going to take with Miles Sanders being the RB36 in points per game and Hubbard being the RB46 and like the league's worst offense, one of the league's worst offense, the Patriots have to claim the title for the worst. With Bryce Young, it was always going to take one of them getting out of the way. And all of a sudden, not only is Sanders apparently getting out of the way this week, but he's been the worst player of them. Like so far, Sanders has forced 5 missed tackles on 63 carries. Chuba Hubbard has doubled that, 10 forced tackles on half the carries, 35. He's been the significantly better player, earning targets too. So even in this kind of blowout game script perceived against the Dolphins this week, like Hubbard can still very easily get there on every single touch.
Yeah, and it's very funny because I sometimes will flex my like percentages of players in the FFPC Dynasty leagues. Like, yo, bro, look at all my Marvin Mims, and I randomly have more Chuba Hubbard than any other player. It's just been the way that it's gone. A guy you don't cut, but a guy you're never that excited about. But hey, guys, look at me now. I'm gonna have 12 points anytime I want it with Chuba Hubbard, maybe 9 points, but I'll be able to throw that in my lineup anytime I want, John.
You talk about the grind, like, man, setting lineups too when you're in so many, it's so tough. You gotta do waivers on Tuesday, then again for other leagues that run Wednesday waivers on Wednesday, just to make sure you covered all your bases and to see who was like out there. And then Thursday you set your lineups, and then you set your lineups again on Sunday morning or Saturday night. Sunday morning is usually when it's most helpful. It's like always having to check in. It's like a 2-hour process just to go through everything.
And those secondary waivers too, you're always going through and kind of double check. But I will say you kind of appreciate the on the clock lifestyle of being in season, especially, when you have the written work and the podcasts and then the other stuff. It's like nonstop, but it is the grind, and, hat tip to everybody who enjoys that. Let's take one more question. Tyler Sperry, Logan Thomas or Evan Engram, and then Pittman or Gabe Davis. We say throwing 3 at us. We'll take 2 out of the 3 here. Logan Thomas or Evan Engram. I think it's obviously Evan Engram, but Logan Thomas is definitely intriguing. Where are you at on that, John?
Oh, I would actually take Logan Thomas this week.
Okay.
It's a much better matchup. I mean, dude, since, if you don't count, Logan Thomas is already seeing 21% of the team's targets. But if you don't count like the game he was injured in or returning for, he's led the team in targets in both games, weeks 1 and 5. 27% target share and 22% target share. And now it's an even better matchup than last week because the Falcons are allowing the 3rd most points per game to opposing tight ends. Like, I love Logan Thomas, like top 6, top 7 option for me. Evan Engram, it's close. It's nitpicking. And these are always the toughest questions because literally it's splitting hairs. Like, the only way we ever figure out the difference between fractional points between the tight end 7 and tight end 8 is like in another universe, a room full of animals typing eventually with infinite time reach that answer because they have infinite time. That's the only way they get there. But to me, it's Logan Thomas, Evan Engram to that point, whittled down target tree, at least 8 targets in 4 consecutive games now, and the Colts allowing the 8th most catches to opposing tight ends. Both amazing options, but I prefer Logan Thomas in this matchup.
And then Michael Pittman or Gabe Davis. Michael Pittman, we'll touch on this in a moment, but why don't you take the start sit, and then let's talk about this new situation in Indy.
Also tough, but I do like Michael Pittman in this spot in particular. Michael Pittman's target share, team high 30.3% mark from Gardner Minshew this year. Not only that, but where the Jaguars have leaked production is out wide. 3rd most yards per catch and receiving yards per game to opposing boundary receivers. And that's where Michael Pittman plays as opposed to Josh Downs. So I am higher on Michael Pittman than consensus this week.
Yeah, I'm very high on Michael Pittman, and I'm also trying to throw Josh Downs in as many lineups as possible. We have Gardner Minshew. You've got Minshew Magic revenge game against Jacksonville. 2 teams that are 3-2, going head to head. This is a really, really fun matchup. But I think that there's going to be consolidation of targets, and you see the Josh Downs bump anytime Gardner Minshew is behind center.
Josh Downs' target share, 16% with Richardson, increased to 25%, to your point, with Gardner Minshew. So absolutely a player that I looked into because I picked up to flex against the Titans. So the Titans leak production to slot receivers the week prior, and then Richardson goes down, and that's how we get there, is taking like Richardson's league high rushing points per game among quarterbacks into actual dropbacks now. We're getting more volume for both Downs and Pittman, at least for the next month.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that I'm treating Michael Pittman as a wide receiver 2, and I'm treating Josh Downs as probably a wide receiver 3 based on how he's got a 97-yard performance with Minshew, and he's got a 12 target performance with Minshew. So like, we really like what we're seeing with Downs, and Downs showed you a little bit of the explosiveness last week at Carol. Like, people like in North Carolina, this guy was a baller. He was a preferred target for Drake May and Sam Howell, big time producer there. So definitely excited about my Josh Downs shares. Here's a question in the chat from Permar. Shout out to Permar. He's always tuning into First Class Fantasy. Yep. Hard one for the second flex. Michael Wilson or Quentin Johnston or Jameel McLaughlin tonight. And if you're listening as a podcast, we're recording before Thursday Night Football. This is an interesting one. Michael Wilson disappointing last week. The week before had his 2 touchdown game. Quentin Johnston on the bye week. Maybe that there's some self-scouting and they try to get him more involved. Or you go with the chance that Jameel McLaughlin has the game flow and the receiving work this evening. Which way are you leaning?
This is a tough one. I still think it's too early to play Quentin Johnston. I'd rather just wait and see as opposed to throwing him out there because the floor is so low if he's still not the team's second wide receiver, which I honestly don't expect him to be just yet, but we're all like looking out for that and Jackson Smith and Jigba and Zach Charbonnet's post-bye rookie bumps. So I get the question. I think Michael Wilson has the highest floor. I think personally, I would play Jameel McLaughlin, and I'm just a sucker for McLaughlin. I don't know where Peyton found him, but he's literally Austin Eckler. He is so good. The issue, of course, is that Javonte Williams will play, but the way McLaughlin has been used, Like, he could very much be like Rashee Rice, where he still outscores the entire backfield in a 3-headed timeshare every single week. Even before Javonte Williams got injured against the Dolphins, or against the Bears, everyone looked to that game and saw McLaughlin and Perine splitting touches, but it was McLaughlin who had 2 touches on the team's opening drive while Javonte Williams was still completely healthy. Like, they just like using McLaughlin, and they're finding ways to work him in weekly. He leads all running backs this year in yards after contact per attempt. Like, every time you watch him, all he does is gain 5 yards. Like, he is so explosive. So I pick McLaughlin and what I'm expecting to be competitive or negative game script.
Yeah, I like McLaughlin. I have him in a few lineups this week. I'm really rooting for that to be here to stay. He's such a fun player. Shout out, to I'll say Matt Waldman did like a breakdown on Jameel McLaughlin. I was trying to find like old Jameel McLaughlin Youngstown State breakdowns. There wasn't a whole lot of people on him, but Matt Waldman, he goes deep and he did a Jameel McLaughlin breakdown. He had only one game against like major competition last year and didn't really produce anything on the ground against Kentucky, but he had a couple of receptions. So I think that receiving work, McLaughlin's a guy that I don't think is going to disappear. It's just difficult. Denver doesn't have enough playmakers that they're going to say, hey, let's put McLaughlin aside. I think that he's absolutely here to stay. If you spent the fab on McLaughlin, you should feel pretty good about that one. Let's take one more question. Zay Flowers or James Cook at the flex? I think I'm going Zay fairly easily based on the recent usage, but where are you at on this one?
It's very easily Zay. Not only 27% of the team's targets in his last 3 games, but at least for James Cook, we're getting like a camouflage. Like, his usage has actually been bad. He's just still getting there because he's explosive. But the better Latavius Murray plays, like, the more touches that continue to be taken away from James Cook. He hasn't handled 61% of the team's backfield touches in 4 consecutive games now. He's only been barely over at 60% and in 1 of his last 4. For reference, he was at 74% in week 1. It's become, honestly, more of a 55, 25, 20 timeshare. And that's like the worst case scenario. And now we have a negative game script where both Latavius Murray and Damian Harris will probably get at least 8 carries each. It's worrisome for James Cook, honestly.
Yeah, it's definitely worrisome. And I've heard the a couple arguments that, let's not panic too much, but I don't know. It seemed like it all kind of went downhill after the Washington game. And I wonder if internally they're worried that he just can't handle this load. I'm very nervous about the second half of the season. If I'm in a league with trades, I'm considering trading James Cook before it kind of falls out from under.
For Zay also, the way you beat the Titans is through the air, of course, and the best part is his depth of target has increased in every game. Like, before, he was getting these dinky, shallow routes and at least was getting scheme targets and using the red zone. But now, like, his depth of target has increased in 3 consecutive games. And so we're talking about seeing 27, 28% of the team's targets with a depth of target over 12 yards. Like, that's how you get there. That's how you explode in fantasy. And so, like, you're almost ahead of Zay Flowers. Given that he hasn't reached a ceiling just yet, we're ahead of it going into London.
Yeah, no, I'm excited about Zay Flowers, and I'm excited about Zay Flowers long-term. I think there was the guy's a little bit of a gadget player. I don't see that. I see him as a guy who's going to have, big time fantasy production for years to come. I love the way he looks. Let's keep this going back to the waivers a little bit. I look at your top 10, after I write mine, and we rarely are in lockstep with the one. We usually have, like, in our rankings, we're relatively close on a couple of guys, but for whatever reason, I don't always have the same number 1 as you, unless it's like a Jameel McLaughlin week. But I noticed we both have Jeff Wilson as the top waiver wire ad this week. How excited are you about Wilson, and your thoughts on the Devon A-Chain less Miami backfield? And do you have any hope for, like, the tertiary guys, like the Ahmeds and the Chris Brooks, or is it really a Mostert Wilson like we saw last year?
It's Mostert Wilson to me, if only because we already have the evidence. Even in week 1, Ahmed was injured in week 2, but in week 1, 19 touches for Mostert, 3 for Ahmed. No one else, Chris Brooks included, was active. Like you were either Raheem Mostert or Mostert and Jeff Wilson. And we say and Jeff Wilson because we already saw 7 games together under Mike McDaniel last year. Jeff Wilson handled 51% of the team's running back carries. And Mostert averaged 10.5 PPR points per game to Wilson's 10.3. Both got there. And I would imagine both get there again, considering it took Devon Achane, who the team loved and drafted, for this to become a committee. Otherwise, it was all Mostert to that point. Chris Brooks only played in week 3 when it was a 30-point blowout. Otherwise, he hasn't touched the ball. Jeff Wilson also, maybe he has a higher floor than perceived, since the Dolphins are also targeting their running backs at the 7th highest rate in the league. That's something they weren't doing last year. They were only using Tyreek Hill for 32% of the targets and Jalen Waddle for 22% of the targets. So Wilson and Mostert for sure. And I don't really include, I've sprinkled on dumb running backs before. Like I sprinkled on Keyshawn Vaughn everywhere this week. I totally get it. But I just don't see a path for either Brooks or Ahmed.
Yeah, so interesting you bring up Keyshawn Vaughn, because this is Tampa Bay coming off of a bye, hosts Detroit. And I'm pretty intrigued by this Tampa Bay team. Mike Evans had a hamstring, somewhat of a hamstring injury. It seems like he's going to be okay. We haven't heard a whole lot of negativity with this injury. The team hasn't, reacted, and it sounds like he's going to go and be at full strength. But Baker Mayfield is 3-1. They host the Detroit Lions. This is a huge matchup for them. The only loss that Tampa Bay had was to the Philadelphia Eagles. And I kind of like what we're seeing out of Baker Mayfield. Am I crazy here, John? What are your thoughts on Tampa Bay?
I'm a little bit worried about Detroit's defense, who has proven comparable. I know they didn't have Kelsey in week 1, but maybe the fact they limited the Chiefs to 20 points, that may be one of the more impressive performances of the entire year. Also, the Patriots in week 2, actually keeping the Dolphins to a 1-score game. Also, that's not going to get topped this year. I don't know how that happens still to this day. But I'm worried about the Lions' defense. Having said that, Baker Mayfield is still leading the league in completion rate under pressure, and we at least know where the ball's going to go. Again, citing Rebar, because he was the first to point it out. Chris Godwin, whenever Mike Evans left the field in week 4, Godwin was targeted on 8 of Mayfield's 17 attempts. So he suddenly was getting pounded targets. And Trey Palmer in the second half matched Chris Godwin in routes run over those last 2 quarters. I know Devin Tompkins got there at 445 and 1, but Trey Palmer's, the profile that I chased in deeper leagues, 14-team leagues where I may need a flex starter this week if Evans sits, given that he is an above-average athlete, had a 32.5% target share in his final year at Nebraska, also ran a 4.37 40 at his size, 98th percentile. So that's the kind of player I chase if Evans sits instead.
Yeah, and it's funny, John, because if we say the words Nebraska wide receiver Trey Palmer, people are like, yeah, whatever. But if we say LSU wide receiver Trey Palmer, people get all hyped for that one. So yeah, I got some Trey Palmer as well. Definitely has the contingent upside, but that's a game that I have circled. One game that's very interesting is the Houston Texans. Love to hear your thoughts on CJ Stroud, but I first want to get your thoughts on Alvin Kamara. New Orleans goes into Houston. Houston's had 7 games where they've given up 7 RB24 or better performances. They've been absolutely shredded in terms of fantasy points to the running back. And you've got Alvin Kamara, who's had 49 touches in 2 games. And he did it in completely different ways. The first game back, he has 13 receptions and 11 carries. Then last game, he has 22 carries and 3 receptions. But any way you cut it, the whole game plan has been get the ball to Alvin Kamara. How bullish should we be on Kamara based on this early usage?
And I am still curious about Stroud in this particular spot.
It's a tough defense, but defense, but you got to like the kid.
They've allowed the 3rd lowest explosive passing rate. So passes to gain 15 yards. The Saints have in the entire league. And we're going to be missing Tank Dell in this game, who's in concussion protocol. Yeah. And Luke Musgrave so far is the only one to clear it, and he played on Monday night. Otherwise, you just don't come back from concussion protocol the following week. So not expecting to have Tank Dell this week. So that also takes away an explosive player. So I'm worried about Stroud to this point. I mean, but on the season, it's exactly what we expected, right? Like, even the reason we bought into Nico Collins is because Stroud came in after seeing the league's lowest on-target rate of throws 10 yards downfield last year. Stroud came in and he led his class with 5 first-round wide receivers through his career, but he still led his class in completion rate on throws on target 10 yards downfield. That was the entire reason to buy back into Nico Collins as an archetype receiver who the Texans don't have otherwise. It's a run-blocking Robert Woods, little tiny explosive, have to be scheme targets Tank Dell, and then Noah Brown, who's also a big run blocker. So this week, a little lower on CJ Stroud given the matchup. Long-term, still a fringe QB1 for me. And then for Kamara, what he did was, honestly, through 3 quarters, he out-touched Kendre Miller 24-7. So if it was a competitive game, you could argue he was going to reach 30 touches. Instead, he got put on the back burner for the last 15 minutes, and Kendre Miller out-touched him 10-2. So if this is like a competitive game, even like 10 points, maybe Kamara, again, does get to 25 to 28 touches. So you have to keep riding it because the carpet was rolled out for him. Like Tony Jones cut, joins the Cardinals, and Jamal Williams on IR. There was never going to be like a timeshare with Kendre Miller. Like Kendre Miller is a great contingency option, but that's what he is. This is still Kamara's backfield until Jamal returns.
Yeah, no, I think like for me, the Kendre Miller you treat as a high-end handcuff. But if you have Alvin Kamara every week starter, I've heard, a couple people arguing that he's a sell in trade leagues. I don't necessarily see it that way. You can't deny the usage, and you can't deny, like, there's so many of these backfield by committees where you have a guy like Kamara and they're completely leaning into him. I'm very much into him. Want to talk a little bit about this Jerry Jeudy trade rumor. What are your thoughts on this? Any team that you would see as a natural fit for Jeudy? And what would be your thoughts on Marvin Mims if this trade were to go down?
Oh, all we're waiting for is someone to go away. So Marvin Mims,
Yes,
like we all know the Marvin Mims ceiling. That's why I know everyone's frustrated by it. We can't even pinpoint when it's going to happen, but if it happens, you have to keep Marvin Mims rostered. I understand some rosters are just down, injured, riddled with buys as well, and they can't keep them. Totally understand. Otherwise, like as I've even said in my waiver column, I would keep Marvin Mims over Jameson Williams, for instance, for the rest of the season, because Marvin Mims' ceiling is higher than Jameson Williams this year. He already leads his own team in receiving yards, despite literally being 5th in routes run among their receivers. So the moment he gets into even 3 wide sets, it's game over. Marvin Mims wins your league in the fantasy playoffs. I never remove him from my roster. I do not care whether his route participation is the lowest or whatever it is on that team. So that's the way I view that. What was the question again, Marvin? Oh, the Jerry Jeudy.
Yeah, so, natural fits. It seems like all the teams that make sense for Jeudy, if we were like doing dream scenarios, would be in the AFC. But I don't know. It seems like Denver's kind of funny. They're not going to trade him he's not going to Kansas City. It seems more like he's going to end up in a New England or Carolina. What are your thoughts?
They also tried to trade him this offseason and no one bit. That's why they gave him, they pick up his 5th-year option because no one wanted to trade for him. So I'm still kind of skeptical. I guess if I had to pick a team, the Chiefs aren't trading for anyone because their entire goal is to fit Chris Jones and Patrick Mahomes under contract. Like, if they have them in the cap space, those 2 players are good enough to make everything else work. You don't need anyone else. Clearly, look at their receivers. You don't need anyone else at all. So I genuinely just don't think anything fun happens, honestly. I don't even know if I have a good answer. I don't even know if Jerry Jeudy's moved at all, to be honest.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just because they also try to trade Cortland Sutton, and so they bench him instead. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's definitely a weird one. I think it's a little bit of a they're trying to get it out there that they want to move him. You never know this time of year, but it definitely seems like Denver wants to move someone. Who knows with this team? But we certainly want to get Marvin Mims more involved. So let's pound the table and let's definitely get that trade done. We had your guy, Cooper Kupp, return. This had to be a joyful moment for you, John, to get Cooper Kupp back in your lineup on teams that you've drafted him on. This is a guy that you were pounding the table for all summer long, catastrophically goes down, but hey, man, comes back, finishes as a wide receiver 1, and Puka Nacua also finishes inside the wide receiver 1 line. Wide receiver 11 and wide receiver 12, 67% combined target share, and they go ahead and trade Van Jefferson like a day later. Your thoughts on this situation with Los Angeles?
Everyone asked after week 1, what happens if Cooper Kupp returns? And like the argument for splurging everything on Puka to begin with was that in week 1, he ran 70% of his routes from the boundary. And through week 4, before Kupp returned, led the Rams wide receivers from the boundary. So Cooper Kupp returning, as we knew, meant nothing to whether Puka was going to be in the field. That's all I care about. Also, the Rams are leading the league in plays per game. And I know people are citing like that's something that's going to regress. But that's regression from last year. That's on us to spot that coming into the season, which we talked about. I was with you and talked about how high I'm on the Rams offense coming into the year, because last year was the first time in Sean McVay's entire tenure they averaged less than 60 plays per game. That regression happens now with a league high in plays per game. And that was the first time all year, or first time under Sean McVay, they averaged less than a 60% pass play rate from neutral game script. Now they're leading the league in dropbacks per game. Like the regression is happening before us. So you can't say it's going backwards whenever it's coming forward. Thus, we saw Cooper Kupp 35% target share, Puka 32%. Tutu Atwell still out there because he runs so many motion plays. They have to keep him out there. Van Jefferson obviously eliminated from the offense entirely, and Tyler Higbee still out there, but you can't earn targets whenever you're playing around a motion guy who targets your scheme too, and Puka and Cooper, the gods. So that's the way this offense works. Now they get a Cardinals defense that is not only creating the lowest pressure rate in the league, but is one of only 4 defenses allowing over 10 yards per catch to opposing slot receivers. Like it's a nuclear week for Cooper and Stafford.
So let's talk about Stafford a little bit, because I think Stafford's the one that's going under the radar a little bit. Like Kyren Williams, we get these like trade questions for Kyren Williams. We get, like last week, there was a couple of start-sit questions for Kyren Williams. Like Kyren Williams to me is here to stay based on there's no competition behind him. He's performed well on the field. I think you call him, is it fair to call him a top 15 running back for the rest of the season, John?
Oh, yeah, because no one's coming for his job. I mean, since week 2, whenever they healthy scratched and traded Cam Akers, Kyren has handled 90% of their team's backfield touches. Even last week, 15 of 16 touches, and he leads all running backs in route participation. His target share has dipped the past couple of games, including a season low mark this past week, because Cooper came back and now these other guys are earning targets. But he's still out there handling everything. Zach Evans was active and he played 1 special team snap, nothing else. No one's coming for Kyren's job.
We had one question. And how about Matt Stafford? Like, I know he's got the smash week this week, but you've got to feel good about him. I mean, I feel like he could have what we saw from Kirk Cousins to start the year. That could be what we're going to see from Matt Stafford for a good portion of the second half of the season.
That, and if you look at their schedule coming up, beyond this game against the Steelers, and the Steelers are so bad in the secondary. Like the stats don't show it since the Ravens dropped 4 touchdowns, but the Steelers iota has been allowing explosive passing plays. The Rams should have no issues moving the ball against them. The Cowboys, who are masking how good their defense is, because the 2 times they've played even league average offenses, the Cardinals and the 49ers dunked on them, made the defense not even look relevant whatsoever. So I don't see the Rams having any issues with Dallas either. The Packers, the Seahawks, and then the Cardinals again. It all paves the way for the Rams to sneak in as a wild card team, and we'll see what their draw is, honestly.
Yeah, no, I think they're going to make it. I think they're a playoff team, and I think that the vibes are very strong right there.
Oh yeah,
I know they lost.
McVay, Stafford, Aaron Donald, Les Snead, Cooper Kupp. They all don't come back together unless they had something planned. They all didn't want to end their, because they're going to walk away together. Like they're all not leaving each other out to dry. But they came back because they didn't want that bad of taste in their mouth from last year. And so like they don't return unless they have something cooking. And this is what's cooking right now. One of the more fun offenses in the entire league. It just depends on Stafford staying healthy, but so far so good.
We had an interesting question in the chat. We just talked about Kyren Williams, Derrick Henry or Kyren Williams. And I want to get your thoughts on Derrick Henry, because last week we saw Henry only outtouch Tyjae Spears 16-11. there's been several games this year where Spears has outsnapped Henry, and there's always the pushback that, it's the game flow. But there's been in previous years, Tennessee will try to impose their will on people a lot longer, and they're more willing to run the ball when they're down. This year, they're kind of turning to the rookie. Do you have concerns about Derrick Henry? And then we can take that trade question. We'll start out. Would you rather have Kyren Williams or Derrick Henry?
I would rather have Kyren Williams because both players have been inefficient, so you can't even make that argument. And Kyren at least has no competition and a significantly better offense. For Derrick Henry, you can't even argue game script. Like, if they're winning, they lean on Henry, and then you're hoping for 100 yards or a touchdown. So you're really already hoping with Derrick Henry. But you can't argue game script when Tajay has at least 8 touches in 4 consecutive games. Over their last 3, we've seen Derrick Henry's share of the team's backfield touches decrease to 64% compared to 77% in his first 2 games. And that's because Tajay Spears has earned 36% of the team's touches in back-to-back games. He's been a PPR, at least RB2 in his last 2 weeks as well. Even on 8 to 12 touches per game, you still start Tajay over Dameon Pierce, Najee Harris, Alexander Madison, those kind of guys weekly, because his usage is just like, when he touches the ball, it's just so much more explosive than those other guys. So I think Tajay Spears, maybe he's not coming for Derrick Henry entirely, but there is still the out of Tajay Spears getting there as a PPR flex option and Derrick Henry getting injured or traded. That's why Tajay is an elite contingency plan.
Yeah, Tajay is it's not Jalen Warren, Najee Harris. Derrick Henry is not cooked by any means, but I do think this could be the next back that can catch the ball, a dynamic younger back where fantasy football managers start kind of pounding the table saying, get my guy Tajay more work. Because to me, Tajay just looks very explosive. He catches the ball naturally. We saw last week he had 5 targets. He's consistently had 4 targets a game. So I'm really into Tajay. He's a guy that I view as maybe the best handcuff in football right now, because like you said, he's developing into a potential where you could flex him. And gosh, if they traded Derrick Henry, it would be like Tajay Spears to the moon. And a blackjack split for the teams that cuffed Derrick Henry, you could end up with 2 fantasy starters out of that. So yeah, let's keep this Tajay Spears thing going. One trend we had last week was the tight ends all smashed. George Kittle, Dallas Goedert, Darren Waller all showed up and had really, really good games last week. Not to mention Travis Kelce having a fantastic game and Sam Laporta, the fantasy god, scoring 2 touchdowns. Where are you at on this group of? Oh, and we have to mention Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts finally gets a game was terrific. He had 11 targets. That was almost a more frustrating than happy, because you're like, why didn't you do this a couple times earlier in the year? But of this group of tight ends that kind of did very well last week, which of the guys are you kind of more confident in kind of maintaining this sort of role? Do you think Dallas Goedert's here? Do you think Waller, Kittle? Your thoughts?
Goedert at least was second in route participation, one of only 2 tight ends running around on 85% of dropbacks heading into that Rams game. He was a common run back from either Puka or Cooper Kupp in DFS last week, just because he was at getting the usage. So the fact he was getting the usage and it didn't matter the first 4 games probably tells me it still doesn't matter. There's no way to pinpoint it. You still just keep running him out there because that's the way tight end plays. Kyle Pitts, I also don't necessarily have faith in, considering the target share and route participation didn't matter before, and it did this game. Jonnu Smith actually ran 1 more route, and Jonnu Smith has been much more consistent than Pitts. Still has, over the last month of the season, more fantasy points, even though he had 1 fewer catch than Pitts this past game. So you can still keep starting Pitts if you like, but I just think it's for these guys, for most of these guys, it's just going to be weekly frustrations where genuinely you can't pinpoint it at all. You just have to suck it up and take whatever you get. I would think most consistent, honestly, none of them, but
none of them.
That's the answer. Honestly, it's none of them. Sam Laporta, who was a DNP today, by the way.
I know. Tough.
He's the only bearing light for the tight end position. I have faith in Kelce, who's putting up career lows across the board in his peripherals, but he's still Travis Kelce. He even got injured his knee, came back on Sunday against the Vikings, scored a touchdown. Didn't matter at all. Mark Andrews, Sam Laporta. Other than that, like everyone else just has name value. Like TJ Hawkins is getting volume, but it's exactly what we expected. Like TJ Hawkinson has to score touchdowns in order for him to return that volume because his depth of target is so low. He doesn't run any deep routes. If he's not pounded targets, you're just not going to ever reach that ceiling that makes his ADP worth it. So no, honestly, to me, like the three mainstays are Kelsey, Andrews, and Sam Laporta. And that's it. Everyone else is like kind of not expendable, but you just suck it up and take it.
And shout out to Andrew Cooper of Fantasy Alarm. He came on press coverage last week. We dove into a lot of these tight ends. It's an evergreen show if anybody wants to go back and listen to it. Here's a weird question in the chat. Jonathan Taylor or Javonte Williams? And you've talked about Jameel McLaughlin, but Jonathan Taylor, came back last week, saw minimal production, and Zach Moss went off. How are you feeling about Taylor? Was this a 1 week thing? What's your confidence level for him this week against Jacksonville?
Not high. I don't know how much his usage increases because you can't take Zach Moss off the field. I don't know where it came from. I don't know why, but Zach Moss is too good to go to the bench, even though you gave Jonathan Taylor $42 million. It's actually the best case scenario because player got paid, which is what I'm always cheering for. So I don't cheer for teams. I do not care. And Zach Moss shoved it back in Jim Irsay's face by being the better player. And Zach Moss is a free agent at the end of the year. So Zach Moss will get paid if he keeps playing like this too. Everyone wins. It's great. But for Zach Moss, only Bijan Robinson has more 10-yard carries. Like no one else has been as explosive as Zach Moss. No running back had passed 67 rushing yards against the Titans. Zach Moss put up 165 and 7 yards per carry. You cannot take him off the field because he's too good. So I think Jonathan Taylor eventually handles 60-40 timeshare, let's say. But Moss, like Zeke with Ramondre, Moss absolutely caps Jonathan Taylor's ceiling, what we perceived to be before.
Yeah, I'm with you. And Zach Moss, people were so quick to put on the bench last week. I know I had a frustrating team where I put him on the bench last week. No more.
I think I would have last week too. Like that comes down to process. I don't mind that at all.
Yeah, but I think at the end of the day, John, it's like, you have a guy playing this well. You lose Anthony Richardson. They're going to lean on these running backs. I think that Moss is a guy that if you have Moss, he's your flex. Jonathan Taylor, he's your RB2. And eventually Jonathan Taylor is going to move into Jonathan Taylor territory where he's a locked in RB1. But being away from the team is difficult. So I guess
to answer that question, maybe it is still Jonathan Taylor, assuming we get 10 to 12 touches this week. Yeah. I just do not know what to expect for Javonte. And Javonte wasn't good when he was playing. That's the thing, because, also baked into the process is the long-term recovery it takes from returning from a torn ACL and MCL. His knee injury much more gruesome to recover from than Breece Hall's. This was always the thought. Even if he was playing, it didn't matter. He was going to be inefficient. And he was terrible when he was playing. So I think I still play Jonathan Taylor, honestly.
Yeah, I'm going to play Taylor every single week. I don't want to miss that breakout game.
Sure.
In for a dime, in for a dollar. I started him last week when he had 6 touches. I'm not going to miss the 2 touchdown game this week, John. I'm just not doing it. And wanted to touch base on another running back that had a fantastic performance last week. Travis Etienne has the best game of his career. Jacksonville wins a huge game in London. Really turned around their season with these 2 back-to-back wins in London. They take care of business against Atlanta, and then they have this fantastic performance as a 5.5-point dog against Buffalo, and they really leaned on Etienne. He's now on pace to go over 60 receptions on the season. How bullish are you on Etienne moving forward?
I mean, how can you not be top 5 range of outcomes? Such a big miss. That's my biggest miss of the year, was not accepting or lumping Travis Etienne into the Alexander Madison, Najee Harris, Dameon Pierce, guys we clearly shouldn't draft list. None of those other guys matter. Travis Etienne actually matters because even for those other guys, let's say they finish as RB14, or let's say they finish as like RB 14, you draft them as like RB 15 or 16, like that lump doesn't matter. Drafting an RB 23 who finishes an RB 13 even doesn't matter. It matters about getting Etienne the third or fourth round, and he becomes a top 3 running back. That's how you win fantasy. That's how you draft. And everything's going right. Not only top 3 in touches per game, not only 5th in route participation among all running backs, but the one bugaboo he had and not getting goal line touches. Over the last 2 games for Jacksonville, they've had 4 running backs active, Dearness Johnson and JaMychal Hasty included, and Etienne has handled all 3 of their running back touches inside of the 10-yard line. He is now getting literally everything. So I don't know how you can't perceive him like as a top 3 or 4 option the rest of the season. He's probably going to outscore Tony Pollard, and I would have gave that a 90-10, 80-20 odds before the year.
Pollard just doesn't look great. I know a lot of it's been.
It's the offense. Don't even get me started. That McCarthy offense is everything we expected. So the red zone woes we did expect. That was baked into my process of being underweight on CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott and the Cowboys offense altogether. Last year, for example, like they were one of only 17 teams in the last decade to score on over 80% of their red zone possessions. It's not a number that happens ever. And then those other teams before them, the other 15 that did so prior to that, averaged a decrease of 16% the following year, which would make Dallas a league average offense. So again, when you talk about what we do during the offseason, that's the homework, because like I can't draft players. I know everyone just strictly talks about players. I can't draft players until I understand their offensive situations and why things happen the way they did. That's what we do. And so the Cowboys I expected to be significantly worse in the red zone. And we always had that wild card with Mike McCarthy's play calling, and that's what's happening now. Dak Prescott has the 6th lowest average depth of target in the league. They turned him to a game manager. He's getting rid of the ball at the 13th quickest time from snap to throw. They're not even letting things develop downfield because they're terrified of giving this, multi-million-dollar quarterback they give the long-term extension to. They're terrified of putting the ball in his hands. And so the offense thus is completely useless. Hayden Winks had some stats earlier this week too about like yards before contact and after contact, how they're developed, which makes sense considering like Mike McDaniel, Kyle Shanahan, they're putting guys in motion because those guys can gain more speed if they're already running. Like when Debo gets a full head of steam, good luck stopping him. Same for Tyreek Hill. Full head of steam behind the backfield. He motions out to wide receiver. Now he's already running, when as the cornerback who's trying to keep up with Tyreek freaking Hill is at a standstill turning his body. You're not going to cover it. Whereas the Cowboys now basically using Tony Pollard strictly under center. And Tony Pollard, who's been one of the most explosive backs in the entire league for his career, is 53rd in yards after contact per attempt. There is no creativity. There is no progress in this offense whatsoever, which is why I worry about them long term.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, John, we've hit an hour. You've been extremely generous with your time. Guys in the chat, apologies for not getting to every single question. The chat is definitely lit. Hit the like button, guys. I'm going to try to get a lot more of these start sit question answers every single Thursday here at First Class Fantasy. But definitely smash the like button. John, you've been awesome. Before we get you out of here, give us a couple players that you think are going to absolutely smash this week. I'll get us started. I'm on Alvin Kamara. I have him as a top 5 running back play this week against Houston. I talked about the 49 touches. Houston's been generous to their RB position. I think Kamara is going to come out and put up a 25-pointer. I would try to get him in all my DFS lineups. I would try to get him, you're starting him every week, but you feel really good if you have him in your lineup. And I'm also kicking the tires on him as a trade target in my leagues where I am able to make trades. How about you, John? Any players you're looking to have a real smash week this week?
I've already talked about Kyron and Cooper Kupp, which I know everyone's high on, but I guess
Cooper Kupp smash week every week, John.
Yeah,
every
so
week.
that's not fair. I don't like when people cop out like that. So I'll give 2 other off the radar answers. One is Drake London. I'm very high on this week. The Commanders have allowed the 3rd highest rate of passing touchdowns so far this year, and wide receiver ones against the Commanders. I think in part because their first round cornerback, Emmanuel Forbes, is 166 pounds, and they've been shadowing him against receivers. And so far, wide receiver ones against the Commanders, Marvin Mims, 113 and a touchdown. Stephon Diggs, 8 catches for 111 yards. A.J. Brown, 175 and 2 touchdowns. And then Forbes got benched in the first half on Thursday night because DJ Moore had already put up 102 touchdowns on him of the 230-3 he finished with. So I'm back on Drake London. Drake London's also been much more consistent than Kyle Pitts in terms of earning targets, over 20% of the team's targets in 3 of his last 4 games, whereas Pitt is just 2 of 4. So love London. And then I think Brock Purdy and Brandon Ayuk are much better plays this week than people are giving them credit for. The Browns have looked like the best defense in the league, or did against injured Joe Burrow in week 1, who could only escape for 82 passing yards, Kenny Pickett and Ryan Tannehill. The one competent quarterback they faced, Lamar Jackson, pasted them for 9.7 yards per attempt and 28 fantasy points. Now they have a couple injuries on their defense as well, so playing the 8th highest rate of man coverage, Brandon Ayuk 11th in yards per route run against man coverage. I have all the confidence in the world, weather permitting, for Brock Purdy, Brandon Ayuk stacks.
I love that one. And Cleveland's been the stingiest defense in the league against opposing wide receivers. But you got to look into the context, and John just gave it to you. And Brandon Ayuk is an absolute baller right now. And Brock Purdy has 4 QB1 games on the season, tied for the league in the lead. So that's got to love that Ayuk Purdy stack. It looks really, really good. I'm going to ride that one out, John. What game are you most excited about this week?
It's the Cardinals-Rams, honestly. It may not even be competitive, but I think it goes way over its total, if only because the Cardinals' offense wasn't the problem last week. Like, I know Josh Downs only completed 46% of his passes, but even playing that bad, the worst game of his career and the season, that was a 4-point game. Cardinals only trailed 24-20 with 8 minutes left in the 4th quarter. What happened then was Joe Burrow, or Jamar Chase really, then broke loose. But other than that, the Cardinals hung around. So given that we kind of know where the ball goes, we assume, or I'm assuming, Demarcado over Keontay Ingram, unlike public consumption, and Marquise Brown, who has now seen 31% of the team's targets over the last month of the season. I think it could be a pretty sneaky shootout here.
Yeah, and for me, I talked about that Tampa Bay Detroit game. I'm super excited about that one. I think Seattle Cincinnati is very interesting because we saw Joe Burrow looking like he's back. Now he's got to face a defense that can put a ton of pressure on him. I'm
leaving the litmus test open. Like, Joe Burrow did look great. I point to that 3rd down in the 1st quarter, 3rd and goal, where he took a big sack, but he was so mobile and moving around. My only issue is that we've already talked about, like, everything the Cardinals defense does wrong, how soft of coverage they play. And Joe Burrow even was only under pressure on 5 dropbacks, but he averaged 1.6 yards per attempt on those dropbacks. Whereas from a clean pocket against the Cardinals, he went 33 of 41 for 309 yards. And the Seahawks defense, recency bias, since they're coming off 11 sacks, but also they're getting Tariq Woolen, Devin Witherspoon, and Jamal Adams back. So I'm not ready to buy in Joe Burrow being like, Joe Burrow's going to be fine, but I'm not ready to say like every week is ceiling week for the Bengals until I see it against like this defense instead.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to learn a lot this week, won't we, John, with that Joe Burrow against that front 7 and that secondary of Seattle. I think they're going to put a lot of pressure on them. That's a really tilting game. Cincinnati has a chance to go to 500, but the game that I think that I've circled on my calendar is definitely the Kellen Moore Bowl. You've got Kellen Moore going against his old team. You got the 3-2 Dallas Cowboys against a 2-2 Chargers team coming off of a bye. I think the wheels could fall off for this Dallas offense if they don't get the win here. Your thoughts on this game?
I think I pretty much already said my thoughts, how I'm worried about this offense. It is a great spot on paper, given that it's going to be a home game in Los Angeles. The Cowboys have training camp in Oxnard, California every single year. Beautiful spot. Amazing fish tacos. But given the inefficiencies we discussed between Dak, Tony Pollard, CeeDee Lamb, like wearing his hate for being on this team on his jersey. You see it every single week. I am worried given how they've created Dak to be a game manager and are taking all the explosiveness out of this offense. Even Brandon Cooks, everyone's saying like buy low. Just pick him up the waiver wire. He's the wide receiver 100 in points per game. Why would you buy low? Just like wait till he's dropped because he's going to get dropped. So I worry about the Cowboys offense, honestly. Yeah,
big time. John, super generous with your time. Let everybody know where they can find you. And once again, give them that code so they can subscribe to your work at 4for4.
There's already a 25% discount, but then you can tack on even more and make it up to 50% off with the promo code Daigle. So that's how you get in at 4for4.com. I'm usually active in the Discord for both start sits, lots of DFS conversation throughout the week. The betting Discord, like that's where I get some of my player prop ideas. Everything's happening. So yes, you can use that promo code Daigle to get even more off for the rest of the season.
And the all-in package at Player Profiler has been lowered to $85. You get $10 off with the code Theo. And I promise you guys, if you have Player Profiler and 4for4, you're not going to need anything else. We got you completely covered. John, have a great week. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. This was a lot of fun today. Check out my episode of Press Coverage with Adam Levitan from yesterday. That's going to drop as a podcast, but you can find it right here on YouTube. And everyone, we hope you crush it this week. Get ready for week 7 with that Buy-Mageddon on the way. And let's get a couple of W's this week, guys.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All-In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.